Pray and recollect. Let's take 5, as my old colleague would say. Let's bring ourselves back or continue, depending, into our walk with God. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Thank you, Jesus, that you are always near. We know in faith you indwell us. You are present in the tabernacle right next to us. You are in our midst, even as we pray in your holy name. Apart from you, we can do nothing. With you, we can do all things. We invite you and the Spirit and the Father, our Blessed Mother, into our conversation. We go a bit deeper, a bit more personal. Let your will be done. Amen. So I've been reshaping slides and reshaping now that I've gotten some feedback and asked some raise your hands questions and stuff like that. I'm getting to know where you're coming from. So I've already changed the 2 parts of this next presentation. I want to go a little bit deeper, actually. I want to talk about the impact of sin and what it does. I've got a few of the more dense slides coming up, so I pre-apologize for that, but I'm going to unpack them. So we are created in the image of God. The Imago Dei is woven into us. That's how we're created. God is one, true, good, and beautiful. Those are his 4 marks. And those are the 4 things we as humans are attracted to towards God, whether that's in his creation or in other persons or in himself. We are attracted towards what is one, true, good, and beautiful. Marketers know this. They manipulate to get us to buy things based on these 4 marks of God. They call it the halo effect. If human beings see beauty, we automatically start ascribing truth and goodness to that person. That is what we always do. This is why they put a beautiful person. This is why Matthew McConaughey is selling Buicks, okay? And why pretty people are packaged next to anything. It's called the halo effect. I think we do this actually when we see truth and goodness too. I think we automatically see the other marks of God around people, and we're drawn to that. But sin comes into this picture, and sin disfigures all of this. And sin fractures the image of God, distorts the image of God within us. And so instead of oneness, we start having divisions inside of ourselves, not just the division between us and God. Original sin didn't just divide us from God. Original sin divided Adam from himself. Okay? I'll read the document in a moment. It put a wedge between him and Eve, between him and creation. And so it is the ordinary salvific work of Jesus to come into our lives to heal our divisions. He wants us to be reintegrated. He wants us to have unity. That beautiful prayer in John 17, the prayer for unity, includes unity inside of ourselves. So healing also includes integration. There are 2 major ways people get stuck in the past. One is a wound. Something happened, or a neglect. Something didn't happen that was a good I needed. And I can go back to heal that wound or that neglect. The other place we get stuck is the irrational scripts we end up weaving around ourselves, absorbing it out of the culture, reacting to the culture, mimicking it, rebelling from it. In psychology, we call these parts. If you're a fan of IFS, interfamily systems, we might call them parts. Freud would have called them defense mechanisms. Everybody in this room has defense mechanisms and parts. Maybe they've been integrated. Maybe they're quite small. They're just a few peeves. But the messier your culture and the messier your family of origin, the messier are you. And you carry these with you. So when I use the analogy of a car and I drive through life with a bus and I have a lot of head traffic, those are all my parts in the back seat. I have 12 to 15 pet peeves that any child, particularly my own, could trigger. Okay? I've had to integrate those. I have 2 defense mechanisms or parts just to handle bullies from when I was 7 years old. Okay. I have one that wants to clean my house a certain way and gets triggered at the piles being left around by my teenagers and even my spouse. I have one that was my whole identity for 17 straight years of my life, the nice guy. Okay? That's my relational perfectionism. These are all in the car with me. So one of the complications, why do I bring this up? Well, healing in itself is difficult and challenging. One of the major reasons why there's an obstacle to healing, there's several, we'll walk through more of these as the afternoon goes on, but one of the major ones is somebody from the back seat is triggered by the memory or by our process of healing the memory, and it puts a stop to it. Or a part in the back seat believes one of the 3 lies and won't let it go. Or it believes one of the myths we're going to walk through in a few minutes, and it won't let it go. Oh, I'm not going to forgive my dad. He doesn't deserve it. And so even though the true self might be ordered correctly in the teachings of the faith and mercy and forgiveness, we can have a part of us that won't let something go or is triggering and reacting. So anybody who is receptive when I raised hands about how much do you have head traffic, and a lot of hands went up, your head traffic is who's in the back seat. And it's very important to be aware of that and understand that and take action to reject it. Back to Saint Ignatius, thank you. So I have to be aware that I have 22 plus seats filled as I drive through life that could be triggered. Multiple could be triggered in a single event. The enemy is very aware that I have parts in the back seat. That's who he's targeting, the parts of me that believe lies. So it's not so simple as we've got just the world and the flesh. We have the enemy also trying to exploit this. So we have the 4 marks of God. He is one. He wants to bring that integration into us. That unity prayer is for us as well. He is true, and that truth comes in and confronts the lies that every unintegrated part and every unhealed wound believes. He wants to bring us goodness to repair the evil of neglect or the evil of something that was committed. Bless you. And then finally, he wants us to be restored to our true beauty. Okay? That's what he's coming to do, to restore the image of God in us, the Imago Dei. Does this make sense so far? I know I just did some blah, blah, blah psychobabble at you. And psychology babbles a lot on this because we don't have our acts together. I could name 8 different ways, different views of psychology would call this stuff. You can call it what you like. Freud is fine. Defense mechanism is fine. So I will read a church document here. I don't even know what ITCS stands for anymore. That's the committee out of the Vatican. The document is called Human Persons Created in the Image of God. And I just want to read a bit of this. Within the perspective of the Imago Dei, sin as a rupture of the relationship with God causes disfigurement of the Imago Dei. This fundamental alienation from God also upsets man's relationships with others. So we have the vertical component, now we have the horizontal component. It also upsets man's relationships with others, and in a real sense, produces a division within himself between body and spirit, knowing and willing, reason and emotions. It divides us. Our feelings don't line up with our thinking, especially if we have a lot of unintegrated or triggering wounds and parts. Our flesh fights with our spirit, okay? Every Lent, there was a Lent, I don't even like sweets that much. There was this Lent I decided I'm going to give up sweets too. I'm going to give up dessert. And I started craving dessert. And I allowed that Lent. I thought, well, we'll do the Sunday loophole, and because Sunday's not Lent. And I began having dessert every Sunday. There was 2 Sundays that Lent. I had dessert at at lunchtime and dinner time, which I haven't done since I was in grade school, packing cookies into my brown bag. I had more desserts that Lent than I would have had I not given it up at all. It was a disaster. That's where I started learning I'm a glutton. And I rebel. And by golly, I'm going to get my desserts if I can't have it 6 days a week. That's the division between my body and my spirit, my passions and right reason. So I can commiserate a lot with St. Paul, Romans 7. I do the things I don't want to do, and I don't do the things I do want to do. And the things I never want to do, I always do. And the things I always want to do, I never do. Who can help me? He cries out the answer. Thanks be to God in Christ Jesus, the one who came to bring his oneness into our divisions, his truth into our lies, his love into our evil, so that we could be restored to our original beauty. So salvation is not us getting our butts into heaven someday. That's the last bit of salvation that we have free will to engage. The ordinary beginning work is he's coming to heal and unify us. That is ordinary salvific work. And if I can have my divisions healed inside of myself, guess what's going to happen to my relationships? They're going to get a lot better around me. And guess what's going to happen to my spiritual life and prayer life? It's going to get a lot holier. This is ordinary work. This is the purpose of healing. This is the purpose of integration. Okay? So the two places I see most people getting the most stuck in the past is their wounds and neglects and all of these parts or defenses that are erected to protect us. The problem with any defense mechanism is it will create the thing it's most afraid of in the medium to long run. Always. It will always backfire. And so this is my most clunky one yet from the same document. How does Christ do this? How does this healing happen? Okay? Christ conforms us to himself through our participation in the Paschal mystery. We have to take our own Via Dolorosa. We have to take our journey of suffering for it to be redeemed. And so we have our Holy Thursday, we have our agonies in the garden, we have our Good Friday, our Holy Saturday abandoned in the tomb to get to our Easter Sundays and our ascension and our resurrection. That's the whole Paschal mystery. But as human beings, we really hate the agony in the garden, and we really don't like, actually, that really Thursday through Saturday is not so fun for us. We'd rather avoid that, and we want the easy button of the resurrection and the ascension. But we have to conform ourselves to Christ, and we take our own journey. So Christ conforms us to himself through our participation in the Paschal mystery. Salvation is nothing less than the transformation and fulfillment of the personal life of the human being. This ordinary personal journey. Salvation is woven into this. How did I know I had 12 to 15 pet peeves triggerable by children? How do you think I figured that out? I got triggered by my children. I yelled at my 2-year-old son for taking too long to pick a yogurt in a refrigerator door. Lost it. As soon as I thought there was 2, so I thought this would be easy. And then I opened the door and saw that my wife went shopping. There was 10 yogurts in there. And I knew, I immediately started dying inside. A part that was afraid of getting yelled at by my dad for keeping the fridge door open too long, triggered right there. I was clueless. I just thought I was efficient at the refrigerator. Get in and get out. But I grew up with, don't just stand there. Get in and get out. What are you trying to do? Cool down the whole house? This, I'm sure, goes back 4 generations to the icebox age, when leaving an icebox door open would have been a disaster. An expensive block of ice that was delivered once a week melts through your appliance and through your kitchen floor, and your food, which is now scarce 100 years ago, is now rotting. That, I could see someone losing it. But Energy Star appliance efficiency, no, this is irrational. And so I went into that fridge and I saw the 10 yogurts and I started dying inside. I started triggering. My rational to irrational teeter-totter started tipping as my emotional activity increased. And my 3 irrational attempts to make him pick a yogurt failed, and I just lost it and I screamed at him. And my wife comes through hearing this commotion, and she's like, come on, John Paul, let's go eat this yogurt at the kitchen table. And I sit on the floor of the kitchen up against the stove, and I said to myself, what the hell was that? What just happened here? And that was me discovering the first of my ego states, or my defense mechanisms, excuse me. The part back there drilled in by my dad to be hyper aware of frugality things. You'd do the same thing about the front door left open. What are you trying to do? Cool down the whole neighborhood? Insert any pet peeves you grew up with. Okay? And we can inherit these. A parent can project them into us, or we can rebel from them. My father-in-law was so obsessed with every nickel and dime that my wife will not look at what things cost at the grocery store. She will not obsess about it. She won't even look. So she came home with a 4-ounce block of cheese that cost $19 at Hy-Vee. And I was like, did you even look at this? No, I just thought it sounded good. She's like, well, we'll just cut it in half and we'll have half now. So she puts a 2-ounce block of cheese into the freezer. We'll freeze that for later. I'm like, in my head, I'm like, that's lost already. We'll find that in a couple of years, which we did. I mean, this is not my hill to die on. So I actually backed away pretty quickly after I reacted like on the $19 of 4 ounces of cheese. And anyway, but why would she not look? Why would she deliberately not see something that seems so ordinary? Who doesn't look at prices? Someone that was in a home where it was obsessively pushed. So she does the opposite. Sometimes kids from strict homes become strict parents. Sometimes kids from strict homes become very permissive parents. They make an oath against the injustice they grew up with. Just like kids from a permissive home might make an oath. I have scripts for cleanliness in the back seat. My mom was a Better Homes and Garden mom. She did not want messes. She shooed us outside all the time. Okay, so be aware of your affective movements. How did I discover those 12 to 15 pet peeves? Because my kids stumbled into them. How did I know I have 2 that handle bullies? Because I had adult bullies come into my world and I watched myself behave in an irrational manner. 1 compulsively ignoring him, and 1 not being able to get out of my head in the fight. So 1 was doing flight, freeze mode, and 1 was doing fight mode. Be aware of your affective movements. So if you've got something irrational, insofar as our conversation, I'm mainly interested in those parts that believe any lie. So if you are going after a shame memory after this conversation today, it's very important you are aware that there could be a part of you that will not let go of shame, or not let go of hopelessness, or not let go of fear. It thinks you're safer by shaming you, or being terrified all the time, or being hopeless. And there are people, again, who weave their personalities around this. So if you have a part of you that believes this, or what if your true self, Ian, what if the true self, what if I believe one of these 3 things? That's trickier even yet. Is my true self ready to be merciful? Is my true self capable of healing? That's a really good question that 15 minutes with me is not going to answer easily. That's a therapy question with a therapist who understands identity and parts. So those were my denser slides. This is going to generate maybe a lot of questions or maybe crickets. I don't know yet. What do you think? Questions so far. How do I know if I have a part? Well, I start acting irrationally towards fight or flight, and I have a big feeling that comes with it. A part will have 1 main behavior, maybe, 1 big feeling. Another clue, by the way, if a part's taking over, is there's a regressive pull back to the age of the part. So if you stop being a rational, functional adult and start acting like a child, that's a clue. Or feeling like a child, okay? That's a clue. Yes. Yes. And it really depends on your relationship and how much you've been able to talk about it. If you're just discovering this brand new, after the fact, you talk about it. What happened? What do you think happened back there? Okay. My wife's German, so she never even talked about any of this with me. she just escorted my son out with the yogurt, and I began the dialogue with myself. I began an integration, and I'll teach you the basic steps of an integration exercise, very rudimentary today. But it's a very hard conversation to have because our first reaction to our internal weaknesses is denial. I didn't do that. You did that. It's your fault. So we say no to ourselves being vulnerable, and we go to the plank in the other person's eye, the speck in their eye, excuse me. That's knee jerk what most people are going to do, denial and blame. Basic core defenses for our inner psychic world. That's what I would have done as a young person. By anytime I was confronted with a fault at 18 or 19, I just blamed the other person and ignored what they said and damaged the relationship. So I was way too brittle for that conversation. Okay. But if they're a healthier, holier, happier, more whole person, then they could answer the question. Well, I think something took me over. I had a Roman 7 moment. Well, what would be the best thing I could do for you when you have a Roman 7 moment? And you talk about it. Well, I think the best thing to do for some people would be do nothing. Just let's talk about it later so I can undo the damage and say sorry. For other people, you could do some sign language like, hey, time out. How about we just take a quick break? If you really knew the person well and they knew themselves well, if my wife, if that had all happened again, my wife would say, Ian, refrigerator door boy's triggering. How about I handle the yogurts and you go do some integration work? And I'd be like, thanks. Okay. One time I was losing it and she just said, Ian, I need you to go get some Campbell's noodle soup from the store right now. And she's not directive or bossy. And on the way to the store, I was like, rah, 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 rah. And on the way back from the store, I'm like, Jesus, thank you for my wife. Because that trip to the store allowed me to retip the teeter-totter back to rational and then start my interior work. I have tools for when I trigger. I have a sequence I go through. I start with separating myself off from the trigger and praying Unbound in case the enemy's lancing it. And then I see who's triggering and I quiet them down. And then I do healing work if I need to. And I look at my stress levels if I need to. That's my best practices for when I trigger. Okay? That's what I do. It would be wise for everyone to have a best practices sequence for their stuff. Okay. Separation from the trigger, because I always trigger to fight mode, or at least almost always. That's, I've got to get away before I do more damage. So that's number one for me. Number two, Unbound. I do way too much work that has spiritual ramifications to ignore that there's spiritual warfare in me and around me. Also, it's the fastest thing. It takes 30 seconds. So then I figure out who's triggering and I get them buckled up again. And I've integrated everybody. I've spent at least a week or two with everybody in my backseat, if not a month. Okay, so I've done a lot of work with who's in my backseat in my short bus that I drive through life with. If you're talking about a student triggering up, they might not even be living out of a true self to do integration work yet. And so you'd be using a completely different set of tools. Professionally, it would depend a lot. Clearing out, follow the student handbook. You might just need to discipline, even though you know it's going to escalate them. Yeah, please. Yes. So they might, if you have a relationship with them or they've worked on this type of thing through their personal improvement plan type of stuff, I forget what they call them in schools, skip or something like that. I forget what it's called. But you can train a kid to handle this if you've been spotting it and someone's been walking along them along the way. You used to do this with the St. T's kids, right, Diane, back in the day, amongst others, just help some of those troubled kids put some tools in their toolbox so that they have a best practices. But if you're starting from scratch, you have no best practices or a relationship, and so it's just going to be messy at the beginning. You have to get there. And God bless all schools and teachers picking up the mess the primary institution left in your lap. Secondary institutions aren't supposed to be doing this work. You're not supposed to be feeding breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You're not supposed to be doing after-school programs. You're not supposed to be doing all this emotion management. This is the secondary institution of academia cleaning up a primary mess of families. We need to find better ways to get into the families. It's not fair to teachers. You're all going to burn out. And if the generations of parenting gets more and more unhealthy as each generation goes by, who's going to ever want to be a teacher? Because the parents become. It used to be when I was a kid, if you got in trouble at school, you got clobbered at home. That was a given. That doesn't happen consistently anymore. A lot of homes, that is the case, thankfully still, or at least in some parts of the country. But anymore, now you've got a mad kid and a mad parent. It's not great. We're into sociology here. We're a bit into the weeds. Let's keep going with healing. So, any other questions so far? All right. Yes, please. Your voices are? How do you know what your voices are? Relationship. Okay. Community is always what's going to reveal these. Because they're there so long in us, we can't see them very easily. So sadly, I needed my children to trample through the minefield of my emotional world to explode all the bombs. Okay. And then thanks be to God, once a bomb exploded, I started knowing what to do about it. So the next day when I picked up a yoga with my son, 80% of my angst was down. I was pre-prepared and I'd already done integration work. So the answer to how do we know how do we find them? It's usually messy. I had the grace of being a therapist, so I often found them as well in the reflection of my clients. So they'd be complaining about this and that and this and that, and like, I think that's an ego state, dot, 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 dot. And then I'd be like, oh my gosh, I do the same thing. And this distressing light bulb would go off and I there. So that was a mercy for me as well. Marriage is going to reveal them all. My dog knows some of she's a smart black lab and she knows what triggers me. So, um, so asking the people around us if you have a beautiful relationship, people with community around us will spot this stuff pretty quickly. Okay. So there was a second question. Yes. Welcome. So a lot of sarcasm, a lot of teasing in your family. Sure. It's sure, yeah, sarcasm and teasing can be extremely damaging. There are some places where it can be okay if everyone knows the rules and everybody's enjoying it and we don't have vulnerable souls being targeted, etc. Um, but it's usually a form of poverty. Like men will use teasing when we like people. Okay, I'm thinking of the old Calvin and Hobbes, Calvin and Sally. He'd throw rocks at her because he liked her. Like there's guys that immature and impoverished out there that think teasing is intimacy, sarcasm is a way to get along. And again, if everybody knows the banter, my wife's family teases a lot, but it's always good natured and it does not cross lines ever. It never gets into drama. But I'm actually pretty careful with it. Um, my wife likes to be teased at times, and she'll give it back, which is what I want. I like a little banter, and I like to win, and I don't like to lose. But I discovered very quickly when she's pregnant, don't do it. Okay, it's not fun for anybody, and so it stops being intimate. And more importantly, there's lots of other ways my wife and I can be intimate. First, we can talk normally, we can pray, etc. So if the only thing I was capable of doing was teasing, that's a real poverty. And when it crosses lines and wounds, that actually would be things to heal. Okay, that the one on my list that's 8 from my mom in 5th grade, that was her teasing me, and it was a wound, and she hid it. She thought it was funny, and it devastated me. I had to do most significant healing work for my mom right on a tease. Okay. There was some questions about reconciliation. So we define forgiveness as the releasing of a debt, and someone raised the hand, um, and Shannon, I think it was you, like, well, and we started touching on reconciliation. So one of the myths, I'll walk through myths in a moment. I would just wanted to visit first on reconciliation and the myth it bumps into. So if I forgive someone, if I do the 7 times 70, am I supposed to go back into a relationship with them? Not necessarily. Okay? Jesus invites us to try to reconcile. When you have something against your neighbor, leave your gift at the altar and go and reconcile. If your neighbor has something against you, if you know your neighbor has something against you, go to them and reconcile. So the onus is on the person who's aware there's a problem to try to reconcile. Here's the huge caveat. The word reconciliation means to have a conversion, to have a change of heart. And so we cannot reconcile with somebody who cannot change their heart. So we don't have to stay, I mean, let's say I don't know, got to be careful. If someone's not mature and capable of real intimacy, we should forgive them, but we'd be foolish to enter into deep relationship with someone who's still not going to be able to take care of our hearts the way our hearts deserve to be taken care of. So we can allow a wall to go up. If my mom were an immature firecracker, always teasing like this, leaving me wounded, I would forgive her for the wounds, but I wouldn't stay close to her, or I would never share anything personal. It would be sports, news, and weather only. I would protect my heart around her because she's not trustworthy with anything deeper than sports, news, and weather. I'm not going to go personal. So I could reconcile with that. I could say, Mom, could you please stop with all the teasing? Oh, can't you take a joke? Gosh, you're so sensitive. And that would be her blaming it back on me. And that would be my sign. Nope, she's not ready to reconcile at all. And I'm going to keep my distance. Does this make sense? She's not capable of reconciling. And I can't force that conversion on her. But I can forgive her and I can pray for her to have that while I keep my distance. So we should forgive 7 times, 70 times. Yes, we should try to pursue reconciliation with people capable of it, but we are not obliged by God to stay in relationship with somebody who is abusive, with somebody who is completely immature, etc. And it can take us a while to realize that. As we start healing and growing and mature, we can come to the realization, wow, my family is dysfunctional. That was a bad day when I figured that out. Because all kids want their families to be perfect, or at least a lot of kids. I did. And then the bombshell went off like, wow, my family's actually kind of messed up. Not horribly so, but they're no picnic. And when I looked at my nuclear family compared to my dad's rest of his side, I'm like, holy cow, there's not a single intact marriage in this whole bunch. Every single person, aunts, uncles, even my cousins have been divorced at least 3 times in that family, except my dad and my mom. That was the only intact marriage. There was big problems going on generation after generation, multiple times. That was not a good day for me, though, because I wanted my family to be perfect. Forget why I got down that rabbit trail. So, okay, yeah, reconciliation. So when I get together with that side of the family, sports, news, and weather. Don't talk religion, don't talk politics. Like my dad taught me that as a kid. Why? Because of his family. Because of his family. Don't go there with people. Not with them anyway. All right. So any questions on reconciliation? What I said so far? Okay. Well, what if I'm married to that person? Well, there are steps to do reconciliation, but when I walk marital couples through it, I have to make sure both parties are ready to do it. Okay. I made the mistake very early on of thinking just the person who was willing to say sorry had to be ready. I did not appreciate how much difficulty the person doing the forgiving can have. Very vulnerable and intimate. And I made a terrible mistake not setting up both parties one time. So I make sure both parties are ready. Yes. Yeah. Reconciliation requires both people to be mature enough to reconcile. Because reconciliation entails re-entrusting ourselves to somebody. If they're not trustworthy, that's okay. Let's just proceed through the myths and some of the consequences, and then I just want to talk shame, and we'll wrap up this section, and you guys can head off back into meditation, and then some. Actually, let's look at the schedule. Yeah, a rest period is in there. We'll resume at 4. We got a little ways to go. I'm jumping the gun just a titch to map this out, but we got about 25 more minutes um, or less. So what are the consequences of unhealed wound? I'm going to move a little bit quickly, fire questions through the computer and fire questions with your hands if you want. We've already touched on the fact that an unhealed wound, hurt people hurt people. An unhealed wound invites us to react. And unintegrated people will react, okay? So just ask my kids and my dog. We've talked about how they can help us continue the same cycles. Unhealed wounds in our defense mechanisms put people on a trajectory where they just keep repeating and repeating and repeating the same dramas until the wake-up call happens or the conversion happens. There's also the phenomena of feeder memories. Unresolved wounds feed unfinished emotional energy into an event that triggers up and wakes up that box. I got on a bus at 17 years old. I was there early, was just reading or vegging out or something, probably reading. This quiet kid got on the bus, sat across from me, also pulled out a book, started reading. 2 other boys got on the bus, sat behind him and started teasing. And I could hear them calling him names. This rage welled up in me, and I had a strong desire to go beat the heck out of those 2. Someone psychoanalyzed me. What happened, 17-year-old junior year Ian? What do you think happened in me that I would feel rage and the desire to beat somebody up? Perfect strangers, didn't know anybody. Yeah, I got bullied. And do you think I was in a healed, integrated state at that time or no? Nope. Nope. So my unfinished business of my rage, which had never been addressed because I had never done forgiveness and healing work, came up and out of me. And also my defense mechanism that likes to beat up bullies triggered. Okay. So I had the emotional energy and a triggered defense mechanism welling up in my little 17-year-old body with a clueless, weak self-identity. Thankfully, I had enough self-restraint, and my people pleaser probably parked me, and I stewed, and the teasing stopped. And I never thought about it again until much, much later. Okay? But yes, good diagnosis. Feeder memory. This is hugely important in parenting and marriage, community, and professional places. If we do not take care of things and they accrue too quickly, before we address them, we can start overreacting. Anytime I overreact, I start thinking, what's going on here? I'm going to look for a trigger wound. I'm going to look for a part. I'm going to pray spiritual warfare prayer. If I'm overreacting, that's a clue something is going on, and I want to start looking for apologize if necessary. Any questions on feeder memories? Yes. How do you know if you're overreacting? Yeah, know thyself. So most people, when they overreact, go into fight or flight. So we can overreact like I might, which is to start yelling at a 2-year-old or 20-year-old. So we can get loud, or we can go into flight mode or freeze mode. And those are variations. So if I have a triggering event and I shut down, okay, probably something going on there trying to protect me. Okay, could be another part. very common defense mechanism called the wall, shuts people down when they feel like they're in danger. Or flight mode. I just get out. I gotta go, and head out. They escape. Does that answer your question? Good question. Our susceptibility to all these emotional lies, we've already addressed the emotional lies a couple of times, so I feel comfortable there. Physical body. This one is gigantic. The research is showing trauma, unhealed wounds, etc. The body, the physical body, is the first place to know something wrong and one of the last places to release it. So when I got the news my dad had died, my first reaction was feeling like I got punched in the gut. My solar plexus exploded. I always pay attention to this part of my body. It tells me a lot. And I would invite you, pay attention to what your body tells you. Where do you carry your stress? You carry it up here? A lot of people do, right up in their shoulder blades, okay? And get knotted up, headaches, migraines, stress headaches, okay? You're carrying it in your muscular skeletal system. I carry it in that nerve bundle here. That's where I feel it first. I don't know how much that's tied to digestive system, but I would say even more people carry their stress in their digestive system. Acid reflux, ulcers, irritable bowel syndrome, colitis, okay? And so unhealed wounds, unintegrated defense mechanisms, ruminating, anger especially, anxiety to a lesser degree, but still noticeably, it really tears up our body. We want to pay attention to our body, okay? No, it's not New Age junk. I have a Catholic book called Parables of the Flesh where a Catholic physician walks through different types of wound and where it might manifest more pronouncedly. Um, would I want to diagnose and write a scientific paper on that? Probably not. We're more fearfully and wonderfully made. But yeah, stress. The research is just through the roof on our emotional world's impact psychosomatically. There is New Age off the deep stuff as well that can get into, and that I'd be cautious about. That there's even that Catholic physician's book I take with a grain of salt too. Anytime I see people getting into anything that has to do with a syndrome, I'm going to start looking at their emotional world. Chronic fatigue syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome. These are the places that medicine starts breaking down, and it gets really frustrating to deal with it. Reproductive systems having issues, endometriosis, fibromyalgia. There's these weird things that happen that Western medicine has a hard time with. And so then we start looking at diet. Hugely important. We can start looking at holistic or naturopath or homeopath. We can go to chiropractors who get outside of the box in interesting and cool ways and maybe some concerning ways. But it's all these efforts, and then of course therapists doing the same kind of stuff with our machines and our biometrics. We're all just struggling to get to know what's happening. Fine. So I would say not only pay attention to your body, pay attention to your head, pay attention to your spiritual sense, and pay attention to your emotional world. Not everybody is equally aware in all those dimensions. Some of you are much more kinesthetic. Your body will tell you something way before your head will. Okay? I have a lot of head traffic. I hear it. So the question, how do you know when you're triggering? Oh, because my triggers tell me. How do you know when I have a part? Because they're screaming in my head. That's how I know I have a part. Okay? They're making themselves known. So other people are very passionate. It goes straight to their emotional world. And when I do healing and trauma work with people, it's amazing to watch them process. They'll usually go to one of the 4 quadrants. That's what I can see in therapy, but it's rippling out into the other places. So there's some good news, is we can do a healing physically, and that will help the whole system. We can do a healing emotionally, intellectually, or even spiritually, and it will affect the whole system. If we can figure out what the epicenter or the etiology or origin of it is, that's the best of all. This is a virus that's making you act out. Okay, this is you haven't slept in 4 days. Get some sleep. You have poor vitamin D. You have no iron. Like we can. So I like when all these disciplines. I love that, the interweaving of specialists working together. The problem is specialists can get arrogant, including bossy know-it-all therapists, and we can cookie cut people into our wedge. Okay, so your Western med doc is just going to give you a medicine, and your therapist is just going to give you meditation, and your spiritual director is just going to give you a litany, etc. But when we can all work together, that's beautiful. So I like generalists better than specialists. Give me a family doc over a specialized med doc any day. They play better with others. Okay. Other consequences. We talked about the eternal consequence, perhaps the most important. What about the myths? I've addressed these myths. We should forgive and forget, right? Should humans forgive and forget? Anybody ever say that? Anybody have that said to you? Here's what the Catechism says about forgive and forget. It's not in our power. Okay? Paragraph 2343. It is not in our power to not feel or to forget an offense. Not a possibility. But the heart that offers itself to the Holy Spirit turns injury into compassion and purifies the memory. But it can be healed. But will we remember it? Of course we'll remember it. We're not supposed to forget stuff. Our glorified bodies won't forget anything. So very unhelpful advice, and also impossible advice. I need to hold on to this to be on the safe side. This is one of the major reasons why I see people hold a grudge. Well, I can't forget this. I got to hold on to this. I got to be safe. This is a disastrous choice. Okay. Not only do you take the full reaping of that emotional stuff staying inside of you unaddressed, but having a bunch of emotions inside of you being triggerable is more likely to be one of those mechanisms that creates the same cycle. Okay? If you hold fear, you will attract a predator. There are people out there that sense fear and want to control because of it. It's like sharks and blood in the water. Yes, don't go swimming in the ocean with a bleeding wound. Be healed. Don't go swimming through life with an unhealed wound. You can attract sharks. It's just as destructive to attract a rescuer, because they won't help you get better either. They'll validate your woundedness and affirm your woundedness and leave you wounded. You don't need a rescuer. You don't need a predator. You need healing. Time heals all wounds. There's some credibility to this, but time on its own does nothing. But time where I have time to sleep on it, there's some real good processing that happens there. Time to pray about it, time to talk and process it, time to think about it, dream about it. That's what heals wounds. So people that shove things too militantly into their box, protect it with addictions or protect it with denial, or any other protectors and parts, time's going to do nothing to that wound necessarily. And that's when we can get a little surprised at something popping out after all these years, and wow, it's still there, and I'm still sad or mad. They don't deserve it. There's the essential grudge, as if I were doing something nice. We already addressed that. How can I forgive if I don't feel like forgiving? I will have usually women ask me this question. It seems like a lie, but forgiveness is primarily an act of will, and it's an act of love for myself and others. There are many acts of love we do that we don't feel like. I've never felt like changing a poopy diaper. Maybe a little newborn. And there's something sweet about it, but mainly I'm just dealing with feces, and it's not pleasant. And so why do I change the poopy diaper? Because it's loving for my kid and their tender bottom. It's loving for my wife to take it for the team. So that's why I do it. There's many acts of love we do without feeling like doing it. It's nicer and better if we can feel like forgiving, if we can cultivate mercy. It was very helpful for me to discover that my dad's dad was a happy drunk. I didn't know that. He just seemed like a nice grandpa to me. Okay. I didn't put together that he always had a glass of scotch next to him. Okay. And that's how he medicated through his marriage, and why he dropped dead early. And when I found that out, I was like, oh, that's why my dad stunk at being a dad. He didn't have a dad either. Huh. And that helped. It cultivated some mercy. But did I need it? No, I could have forgiven him without knowing that, although I'm glad I did. It made it easy. Forgiveness means what happened is okay. I hear this one quite a bit, and I believe it comes out of the sloppy way we often do say sorry in American culture, and it sounds something like this. Sorry about that. That's okay. Which is a step in the right direction, but there's some really problematic things with that sentence. Sorry about that. What did I just apologize for? Nothing specifically. And what did they say in response? It's okay. You did evil, but it's okay. So the first time I apologized to my wife and she said, I forgive you, I thought, wow, who taught you that? I figured it was a ministry or some training or professional. She's like, my mom and my dad. It's like, go mom and dad. They went up another notch in my book, and I hold them in high esteem. My stepmom and stepdad, excuse me. Yeah, I'm sorry for blank. I'm sorry I lost my temper. I'm sorry for that tone of, I forgive you. That's the proper response. And if there's a bigger wound, there's more steps to the reconciliation. That's steps 1, 2, and 7. There's 4 other steps when I do serious wounds that are important in reconciliation. But that's sufficient for wounds and the day-to-day life. Forgiveness means they're off the hook. Even Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. When Stephen prayed this for St. Paul and the others stoning him to death, were they off the hook? I know they had the answer still before God. One of the accusers stepped out of the dialogue. St. Stephen said, they owe me nothing. But they still will stand before with God for their behaviors, and answer for it. We all will. Every hair on our head, every word out of our mouth will be answered or addressed. Could I forgive somebody and prosecute them? Let's say someone stole my car, and they were caught. And can I forgive them and still throw the book at them? Absolutely. Could I forgive them and let them slide? I could discern that too. The point is, I have a choice. Forgiveness does not mean anybody's off the hook. It might be the most loving thing in the world for that person, a juvenile car thief, to be prosecuted and scared straight. Very loving. I already forgave them. Why do I feel so hurt and angry? Already touched on this. Number one reason is we did forgiveness and we skipped healing. And we already addressed the last one. If I forgive them, I have to let them back in my life. Any questions on myths? So, please. That's a great question. What's the difference between processing and overthinking? So, when we're processing by prayer, spiritually, by words, intellectually, by affective movement, emotionally, or even kinesthetically in my body, and I go for a run and feel better, or however I'm doing it in my body. When we process, at least one of those 4 dimensions is improving. My body feels better, my heart feels better, my mind feels better, my passions have surged and now feel better. When we're ruminating, there's 2 reasons why we might loop. Rumination is one of them. Okay, so rumination is not praying or thinking. Rumination means an emotion has grabbed my imagination and is running with it. Doesn't matter what the emotion is. Okay, so if I'm ruminating in anger or lust or gluttony or depression or anxiety, I will always feel more of that feeling when I'm done ruminating or as I'm ruminating. I will always feel more angry, more lustful, more gluttonous, more sad, more anxious. Okay, so that's always a sign I'm overthinking things. Is do I feel better or feel worse? Okay, but that's the emotional mind grabbing our imagination and running like a hamster on a hamster wheel, going nowhere with a whole lot of energy. Okay, we will feel worse. That's one sign. Another sign we're not progressing is when we try to do some work, it just keeps resetting back to the same place, same place, same place, same place. That's more of a trauma term, and it's called looping. Um, and so the nocturnal version of this is the reoccurring nightmare. I just keep having the same nightmare, same nightmare, same nightmare. Okay. And what I would recommend to somebody in that boat would be that night, give yourself permission to finish your dream. You keep waking yourself up. You're not finishing the dream. You're not processing it. It's too scary. It's too whatever. One of these lies are coming in. Too ashamed. I'm too scared. It's hopeless. And it's blocking it. Usually it's fear. And we wake ourselves up. And then we reset the nightmare to the next hour or the next day or the next week. So it's amazing, but it actually does work to say, hey, self, I give you permission to sleep through the night. Let's not wake ourselves up. Let's finish this dream. There's other ways to access dreams too. Therapy, and probably spiritually, you could pray into a dream, you could do healing of memories on a dream, etc. So I'm not a huge dream guy, but they're really fascinating and they're really important. Um, so there's the. Did I answer that question? Probably way too much. Yes. And so how do I handle the fourth commandment and last commandment? The last myth? Oh, and the fourth commandment? Okay, honor your father and mother. Um, this is a great question. Okay. So the last myth is, do I have to be in a relationship with somebody that I've forgiven? The answer is no. What if that's my mom or my dad and I have a commandment to honor my father and my mother? Okay. This is the way I would approach this one. And that is, you honor their fatherhood and their motherhood as if it were fully intact and alive, not what they have on display, which is probably not motherhood or fatherhood. Who are my mother and my brothers? Those that do the will of my heavenly Father. So let's say I had a completely dysfunctional mom who couldn't stop with the emotional sarcasm and wounded me all the time. Okay, then honoring her would be, and let's imagine she's died and she's in heaven and she's done purgatory and now she's through purgatory, just so we can keep my mom in the story. What would honor my mom the most in heaven is me minimizing the damage she did to me in her broken state. The boundary I set to my broken mom would honor her motherhood better than staying in a dysfunctional, abusive relationship with her. It is not honoring to my mom's true motherhood to stay in an abusive relationship, bringing out the worst in her or allowing the worst in her. That's actually destroying her motherhood. It's not honoring her. So we're leaping around here, but truly honoring my mother, if she were abusive and dysfunctional, would be to have nothing to do with her. And that helps her not to accrue more sins against me. And I would pray for her. And I would pray for her conversion, but I would stay away from her. And then hopefully that boundary could lead to her repentance. Mom, I will have nothing to do with you until you work on the sarcastic abuse stuff. Nothing. And you will not see my grandkids because there's no way in hell I'm going to let you have access to them. And that's all very loving things to say to my mom to give her a motivation to do work she should have done a long time ago. That's how I honor. That's how I live out the fourth commandment. Good boundaries, good self-care, becoming who I'm created to be, despite the fact that mom or dad didn't get around to being who they were created to be, and praying for them to get there. Does that make sense? This is tough love, but it's still love. This is tough honoring, but it's still honoring. And God willing, they can get around. I have a much better relationship with my dad now, okay? And he's in heaven. I had no relationship with him, or not much, when he was on earth. Okay, that honors my dad. Um, who do I think was the main instigator of me being on an 8-day silent retreat and having a whole bunch of dad memories pop up? And the whole retreat, unbeknownst to me, was going to be all about fatherhood. Who do I think instigated that? My dad. praying for me from heaven. Certainly my heavenly Father, from whom all fatherhood flows. My dad instigated that. He's been praying for me ever since he got himself into heaven. Or we got him into heaven. He didn't do that. We did that. Okay. Good, great question. Very good. All your questions are amazing, actually. I want to give you permission now to start getting into the shame box and the mom and dad box. Heavier stuff. Be very cautious. If you cannot be loving towards yourself and merciful, if you can't corral the parts who are triggering, if you have parts that are triggering, do not do this. Stick with the other stuff. Don't go there. Don't set yourself up to be re-injured by yourself. But if you are determined, I am going to be loving to myself, I'm going to do this stuff that I do towards others, I'm going to do this internally, then you can start going into the shame box. I would like everybody to try to do one shame memory if you are qualified to do by what I just said. And we're going to see how that goes. I do not want to hear anybody's shame memory at all. I do not want to talk about, but certainly in here. But I would like you all to try a shame memory. How do I know what my shame box is? Really simple. Every time I think about it, I want to push it away immediately, and I feel awful. Okay. If you are a critic, you have to quiet down the critical voice to do this, or don't do it. If you are too perfectionistic and haven't integrated that, quiet that down. For now, the quieting should just be, shh, thank you, I'll take care of this memory. Quiet. Be aware, understand, take action to reject. I'll go a little deeper into a proactive way to integrate a part. Not much. That's really to invite you to podcasts, books, or therapy. If you know you have a lot of head traffic, oh, your life will be so much better to learn how to address that. That's a game changer. But that's way beyond this retreat. That would be its own retreat. So you're welcome to do the mom, dad, the dad box, etc. And then we have more appointments coming up. And questions before we go into the break and the rest? Yes. This is my best practice for when I trigger personally. So I distance myself from the trigger. I pray unbound. I figure out if a part has triggered a child pet peeve, for example, and I buckle them back into their seat gently but firmly. And then I assess my stress levels. Are there other things going on, or is there a wound? Stress levels are more likely, so that's the one I default to after the first three usual suspects. Now, there is a deeper way to do the integration. I'll give you steps on that briefly if you're interested the next time we talk. Any other questions? Okay. You're on break to do some meditation and some rest.